Hello, everyone. It's Mr. Nobody, and I'm bringing you another great literature reading. Today, I'm going to read you a little bit from Pollyanna. If you haven't read the book, it's a whole lot of fun. It's a really nice kids' book, especially for a young girl like an 11-year-old, same age that Pollyanna is in here. Or if you haven't had a chance to watch the Disney movie, it is one of the truly great old Disney movies. It holds up super well. It's fun. It's silly. My girls really enjoyed it. It's got Hayley Mills in it, and she just does a fantastic job. I believe they invented a special category in the Oscars just so they could give her an award for her performance in that role. It's a great story to read and to watch. Anyway, Chapter 1: Miss Polly. Miss Polly Harrington entered her kitchen a little hurriedly this June morning. Miss Polly did not usually make hurried movements. She especially prided herself on her repose of manner. But today she was hurrying, actually hurrying. Nancy, washing dishes at the sink, looked up in surprise. Nancy had been working in Miss Polly's kitchen only 2 months, but already she knew that her mistress did not usually hurry. Nancy. Yes, ma'am, Nancy answered cheerfully, but she still continued wiping the pitcher in her hand. Nancy, Miss Polly's voice was very stern now, when I'm talking to you, I wish you to stop your work and listen to what I have to say. Nancy flushed miserably. She set the pitcher down at once with the cloth still around it, thereby nearly tipping it over, which did not add to her composure. Yes, ma'am, I will, ma'am, she stammered, righting the pitcher and turning hastily. I was only keeping on with my work, 'cause you specially told me this morning to hurry with my dishes, you know. Her mistress frowned. That will do, Nancy. I did not ask for explanations. I asked for your attention. Yes, ma'am. Nancy stifled a sigh. She was wondering if ever in any way she could please this woman. Nancy had never worked out before, but a sick mother suddenly widowed and left with 3 younger children besides Nancy herself had forced the girl into doing something toward their support. She'd been so pleased when she'd found a place in the kitchen of the great house on the hill. Nancy'd come from the Corners, 6 miles away, and she knew Miss Polly Harrington only as the mistress of the old Harrington homestead, one of the wealthiest residents of the town. That was 2 months before. She knew Miss Polly now as a stern, severe-faced woman who frowned if a knife clattered to the floor or if a door banged, but who never thought to smile even when knives and doors were still. When you've finished your morning work, Nancy, Miss Polly was saying now, you may clear the little room at the head of the stairs in the attic and make up the cot bed. Sweep the room and clean it, of course, after you clear out the trunks and boxes. Yes, ma'am, and where shall I put the things, please, that I take out? In the front attic, Miss Polly hesitated, then went on. I suppose I may as well tell you now, Nancy. My niece, Miss Pollyanna Whittier, is coming to live with me. She is 11 years old and will sleep in that room. A little girl coming here, Miss Harrington. Oh, won't that be nice? Cried Nancy, thinking of the sunshine her own little sisters made in the home at the Corners. Nice. Well, it isn't exactly the word I should use, rejoined Miss Polly stiffly. However, I intend to make the best of it, of course. I am a good woman, I hope, and I know my duty. Nancy colored hotly. Of course, ma'am. It was only I thought a little girl here might brighten things up for you, she faltered. Thank you, rejoined the lady dryly. I can't say, however, that I see any immediate need for that. But, of course, you'd want her, your sister's child, ventured Nancy, vaguely feeling that somehow she must prepare a welcome for this lonely little stranger. Miss Polly lifted her chin haughtily. Well, really, Nancy, just because I happen to have a sister who is silly enough to marry and bring unnecessary children into a world that was already quite full enough, I can't see how I should particularly want to have to care for them myself. However, as I said before, I hope I know my duty. See that you clean the corners, Nancy, she finished sharply as she left the room. Yes, ma'am, sighed Nancy, picking up the half-dried pitcher, which was now so cold it must be rinsed again. In her own room, Miss Polly took out once more the letter which she had received 2 days before from the faraway western town, and which had been so unpleasant a surprise to her. The letter was addressed to Miss Polly Harrington, Beldingsville, Vermont, and it read as follows. Dear Madam, I regret to inform you that the Reverend John Whittier died 2 weeks ago, leaving one child, a girl 11 years old. He left practically nothing else, save a few books, for as you doubtless know, he was a pastor of this small mission church and had a very meager salary. I believe he was your deceased sister's husband, but he gave me to understand the families were not on the best of terms. He thought, however, that for your sister's sake you might wish to take the child and bring her up among her own people in the East. Hence I am writing to you. Little girl will be all ready to start by the time you get this letter, and if you can take her, we would appreciate it very much if you would write that she might come at once, as there's a man and his wife here who are going east very soon, and they would take her with them to Boston and put her on the Beldingsville train. Of course, you will be notified what day and train to expect Pollyanna on. Hoping to hear favorably from you soon, I remain, respectfully yours, Jeremiah O. White. With a frown, Miss Polly folded the letter and tucked it into its envelope. She had answered it the day before, and had said she would take the child, of course. She hoped she knew her duty well enough for that, disagreeable as the task would be. As she sat now with the letter in her hands, her thoughts went back to her sister, Jenny, who had been this child's mother, and to the time when Jenny, as a girl of 20, had insisted upon marrying the young minister, in spite of her family's remonstrances. There had been a man of wealth who had wanted her, and the family had much preferred him to the minister, but Jenny had not. The man of wealth had more years as well as more money to his credit, while the minister had only a young head full of youth's ideals and enthusiasm and a heart full of love. Jenny had preferred these, quite naturally, perhaps, so she had married the minister and gone south with him as a home missionary's wife. The break had come then. Miss Polly remembered it well, though she had been but a girl of 15, the youngest at the time. The family had had little more to do with the missionary's wife. To be sure, Jenny herself had written for a time, and had named her last baby Pollyanna for her two sisters, Polly and Anna. The other babies had all died. This had been the last time Jenny had written, and in a few years there had come the news of her death, told in a short but heartbroken little note from the minister himself, dated at a little town in the west. Meanwhile, time had not stood still for the occupants of the great house on the hill. Miss Polly, looking out at the far-reaching valley below, thought of the changes those 25 years had brought to her. She was 40 now, and quite alone in the world. Father, mother, sisters, all were dead. For years now she had been sole mistress of the house, and of the thousands left her by her father. There were people who had openly pitied her lonely life, and who had urged her to have some friend or companion to live with her, but she had not welcomed either their sympathy or their advice. She was not lonely, she said. She liked being by herself. She preferred quiet. But now... Miss Polly rose with frowning face and closely shut lips. She was glad, of course, that she was a good woman, and that she not only knew her duty, but had sufficient strength of character to perform it. But Pollyanna, what a ridiculous name. Chapter 2. Old Tom and Nancy. In the little attic room, Nancy swept and scrubbed vigorously, paying particular attention to the corners. There were times, indeed, when the vigor she put into her work was more of a relief to her feelings than it was an ardor to efface dirt. Nancy, in spite of her frightened submission to her mistress, was no saint. "I just wish I could dig out the corners of her soul," she muttered jerkily, punctuating her word with murderous jabs of her pointed cleaning stick. "There's plenty of 'em needs cleaning, all right, all right. The idea of sticking that blessed child way off up here in this hot little room with no fire in the winter, too, and all this big house to pick and choose from. Unnecessary children, indeed. Snapped Nancy, wringing her rags so hard her fingers ached from the strain. "I guess it ain't children what is most unnecessary just now." For some time she worked in silence. Then, her task finished, she looked about the bare little room in plain disgust. "Well, it's done my part, anyhow," she sighed. "There ain't no dirt in here, and there's mighty little else. Poor little soul. Pretty place this is to put a homesick, lonesome child into," she finished, going out and closing the door with a bang. "Oh," she ejaculated, biting her lip. Then doggedly, "Well, I don't care. I hope she did hear the bang. I do." In the garden that afternoon, Nancy found a few minutes in which to interview old Tom, who had pulled the weeds and shoveled the paths about the place for uncounted years. "Mr. Tom," began Nancy, throwing a quick glance over her shoulder to make sure she was unobserved, "did you know a little girl was coming here to live with Miss Polly?" "A what?" demanded the old man, straightening his bent back with difficulty. "A little girl to live with Miss Polly." "Go on with your joking," scoffed unbelieving Tom. Why don't you tell me the sun's gonna set in the east tomorrow?" "But it's true, she told me so herself," maintained Nancy. "It's her niece, and she's 11 years old." The man's jaw fell. "Shaw! I wonder now," he muttered. Then a tender light came into his faded eyes. "It ain't, but it must be Miss Jenny's little gal. There wasn't none of the rest of 'em married. Why, Nancy, it must be Miss Jenny's little gal. Glory to be praised to think of my old eyes a seeing this." "Who's Miss Jenny?" "Oh, she was an angel straight out of heaven," breathed the old man fervently. "But the old master and Mrs. knew her as their oldest daughter. She was 20 when she married and away from here long years ago. Her babies all died, I heard, except the last one. And that must be the one was a-comin'." "She's 11 years old." "Yeah, she might be," nodded the old man. "And she's going to sleep in the attic. More shame to her," scolded Nancy, with another glance over her shoulder toward the house behind her. Old Tom frowned. The next moment a curious smile curved his lips. "I'm a-wonderin' what Miss Polly will do with the child in the house," he said. "Well, I'm wondering what a child would do with Miss Polly in the house," snapped Nancy. The old man laughed. "I'm afraid you ain't fond of Miss Polly," he grinned. "As if anybody could be fond of her," scored Nancy. Old Tom smiled oddly. He stooped and began to work again. "I guess maybe you didn't know about Miss Polly's love affair," he said slowly. "Love affair? Her? No. I guess nobody else didn't neither." "Oh, yes, they did," nodded the old man. "And the fella's living today, right in this town, too." "Who is he?" "I ain't tellin' that. I ain't fit that I should." The old man drew himself erect. In his dim blue eyes, as he faced the house, there was a loyal servant's honest pride in the family he had served and loved for long years. "But it doesn't seem possible. Her a lover," maintained Nancy. Old Tom shook his head. "You didn't know Miss Polly as I did," he argued. "She used to be real handsome. She would be now if she'd let herself be." "Handsome? Miss Polly?" "Yeah. She just let that tight hair of hers out all loose and careless like, as it used to be. Wear the sort of bonnets with posies in 'em, kind of dresses, all lace and white things. You see, she'd be handsome. Miss Polly ain't old, Nancy." "Ain't she, though? Well, then she's got an awfully good imitation of it, she has," sniffed Nancy. "Yeah, I know. It begun then, at the time of the trouble with her lover," nodded old Tom. "Seems as if she's been feeding on wormwood and thistles ever since. She's that bitter and prickly to deal with." "I should say she was," declared Nancy indignantly. "There's no pleasing her. Nohow, no matter how you try. I wouldn't stay if it wasn't for the wages and the folks at home what's needing 'em. But some day, I shall just boil over, and when I do, of course it'll be goodbye, Nancy, for me. It will. Old Tom shook his head. "I know. I felt it. It's natural. But 'tain't best, child, 'tain't best. Take my word for it, 'tain't best." And again he bent his old head to the work before him. "Nancy!" called a sharp voice. "Yes, ma'am," stammered Nancy, and hurried toward the house. And that's all for today. Maybe I'll follow up with this. This is such a fun book to read. I enjoy it so much. So wait for part 2, and maybe we'll read a little bit more of Pollyanna. We'll see you next time.